Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to Artist Responds to Authoritarianism, the second event of the 2019-2020 Kupferberg Holocaust Center and National Endowment for the Humanities Colloquium, entitled Authoritarianism on the Continuum, Complicity, Opposition, and Dissent. I am Dr. Laura Cohen, the KHC's Executive Director. Who's been to the first NEH event that took place? Anyone? A few. Okay. The Kupferberg Holocaust Center is situated on the traditional land of the Mantinnecock people who continue to live here today. We offer gratitude and respect to all of the indigenous people of Turtle Island, past, present, and future, including the Lenape and Shinnecock peoples. What I just read is what we call a land acknowledgement, a statement recognizing that the land we all occupy in the course of our daily lives, including our schools, jobs, parks, and homes, as well as the names of towns and cities, was first inhabited by another group of people who were forcibly expelled and murdered. Today, we identify those crimes for what they are: mass atrocities and genocide, the horrors of which continue to have negative social, cultural, political, psychological, and economic impacts upon and within their communities. The KHC's mission is to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping, using the lessons of the Holocaust. In doing so, we teach and empower citizens to become agents of positive social change in their communities. This colloquium, in tandem with our newest exhibition, Survivance and Sovereignty on Turtle Island, engaging with contemporary Native American art, have both found their home at the KHC because it is through studying the Holocaust that we develop the vocabulary to inspect and acknowledge other genocides and nationalist movements, as well as contemporary reactions to them. This year's colloquium explores current manifestations of authoritarianism and public responses voicing both complicity and dissent. It includes a year-long program of events drawing upon the community of scholars at QCC whose work addresses themes pertaining to psychological, ideological, political, and aesthetic conditions that undergird authoritarianism. We're honored to welcome our two esteemed guests today, Greg Sholette and Cannupa Hanska Luger, for what promises to be a thought-provoking dialogue. The colloquium is organized by Dr. Julia Rothenberg, hello, the KHC's current scholar in residence. Dr. Rothenberg is an associate professor of sociology in QCC's social sciences department. Her pedagogy and publications focus on overlapping topics within urban sociology and the sociology of art, race, and ethnicity, as well as social and cultural theory. Please also join me in welcoming KHC Curator in Residence and QCC faculty member from the Art and Design Department and Gallery and Museum Studies program, Kat Griffin. Kat led the 2018-2019 KHC Colloquium on Turtle Island, which provided the inspiration for the exhibition. Finally, the series was made possible due to the generous support of the National Endowment for the Humanities, as well as the New York City Council. I'd also like to thank the KHC staff, including Marissa Hollywood, Joel George, and Victoria Fernandez, as well as Jesse Pena, I'm getting this wrong the second time, Jesse Pena and Ray Perez from QCC's Media Services, and Phil Roncaroni and Leo Correa from the Marketing Department. Finally, let's look at your cell phones. Take them out. Now let's silence your cell phones. You can absolutely record, but let's just keep them quiet. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Julia Rothenberg.
Hello, and thank you all for being here. I'm very excited about this event. This particular event, we are going to be talking about art and politics. Artists have been responding to governmental action across the world throughout history, focusing on artists' responses to repression, state aggression, and authoritarianism in places like the United States, the Middle East, and other parts of the world. This event will investigate both the past and present of artists' interventions in social and political space. We're very happy to host cultural activist and artist Cannupa Hanska Hanska Luger, whose collaborative work Mirror Shield Project is now on view at the KHC out there, and Greg Sholette, artist, author, professor of art and policy at Queens College, and co-director of the Social Practice Queens program. Both speakers are going to discuss their work with activist art and the ever-changing relationship between art, activism, and politics. I'm going to introduce Greg, and after Greg speaks, Kat is going to introduce Cannupa, so I'll start with talking about Greg. In his wide-ranging art, activist, and writing practices, Greg Sholette has developed a self-described, viable democratic counter-narrative that, bit by bit, gains descriptive power within the larger public discourse. Sholette is a founding member of Political Art Documentation Distribution, otherwise known as PAD, which issued publications on politically engaged art in the 1980s, and Repo History, which repossessed suppressed histories in New York in the 1990s. More recently, he's a founding member of Gulf Labor, a group of artists advocating for migrant workers constructing museums in Abu Dhabi. In his numerous essays and books, including his most recent book, Art as Social Action, Sholette has documented and reflected on 4 decades of activist art that, for its ephemerality, politics, and market resistance, might otherwise remain invisible. His recent art installations include Imaginary Archive at the Institute of Contemporary Art, University of Pennsylvania, and the White Box at Zeppelin University, Germany. His collaborative performance Precarious Workers Pageant premiered in Venice on August 7th, 2015. Greg is a professor in the Queens College Art Department at the City University of New York, where he co-directs the MFA concentration in social practice art, known as Social Practice Queens. So we'll start with Greg. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, everyone, for making this possible. It's wonderful to be here. How is everybody doing this afternoon? Good. It's good to see so many students, and some of my students and former students are here, too. I teach at Queens College, and I think before I finish, I'm going to talk about the subject, but before I finish, I want to talk a little bit about social practice Queens before Cannupa comes up, so remind me in case I forget, because you might be interested in that program, and since we're neighbors and connected, that would be maybe a useful thing. Is there like a channel changer here, or put on Netflix? It's here somewhere. Oh, thank you very much. Thanks. So this is a big subject, a really difficult subject, and I think it's particularly difficult today because across the world, we see more and more state governments moving in a direction of authoritarianism and xenophobia. It's just a really awful moment that I've never seen in my lifetime, and I've been around a little while longer than most of you. From Brazil to the former East, Slovenia, Hungary, Poland, we see these kind of governments arising that are excluding people, that are pressuring people, taking away civil rights. And so we really have to be kind of vigilant, and that's why it's really important to have this program. Artists play a role in this. They're certainly not maybe the leading edge, activists are, but artists try to find a way, I think, to sort of channel their work into what activists are doing, and that's kind of what I'm going to talk about. A little bit of my own biography, too, how I ended up here and why I'm doing the kind of work I'm doing. And maybe it comes under the umbrella of this term that we hear a lot now called decolonize this place. And I'll come back to that sort of towards the end of the talk. This is actually a demonstration that took place at the Brooklyn Museum, and that's the rooftop of the Brooklyn Museum, calling on the Brooklyn Museum to really think about its relationship to the land and people and other issues. And most of the people carrying out these demonstrations are artists. And that's what I think is kind of important to focus on here is we are artists, and we're actually asking questions about the art world and its institutions and asking them to change their policies and to think about what they're doing, right? So that would be a little bit like doctors at a hospital going and saying, well, listen, we think you're not practicing medicine right. We're going to go on strike until you do it right. It's a little bit kind of along those lines. I'll explain this a little more clearly by going back in time. But before I do that, if you have a chance, you could take a look at this issue of this issue of journal called Field, right? Field, which is a socially engaged art journal, comes out of California. And I did a special issue just recently. It's the last two issues, 12 and 13. And I surveyed people all around the world and asked them, what is happening in your country and how are artists responding to the situation? And this goes from Brazil to India to China to Puerto Rico and pretty much everywhere, Canada, native cultures, indigenous people. It's got about 30 different short reports. And of course, a lot of the reports are very sadly negative, I'm afraid to say. As I was saying before, this turn towards authoritarianism is really spreading. There are a few positive reports, Ireland being one of them. But anyway, I encourage you to try to check this out and get the bigger global picture that I'm not going to speak about, really focus on today so much, but it gives you an overview of this very question that this series is raising. But let me go back in time. When I came to New York from Philadelphia, where I grew up outside Philadelphia, I moved here in 1977 to go to the Cooper Union, which is an art school in the city. And I worked with a professor there named Hans Haacke, a German professor. He's lived in this country for many, many years. And he had an important exhibition coming up at the Guggenheim Museum in 1971. And because one of the pieces in the exhibition was about real estate problems in New York City. It was about real things that were happening in New York City at the time. The people who ran the museum said, we can't have this. This isn't really art. This isn't aesthetic, you know, and they canceled his show. After the show was canceled, a group of artists that he was also part of, a collective called Art Workers Coalition, did a demonstration in the Guggenheim Museum, which if you've been to, I'm talking about the one, of course, on Fifth Avenue, the main flagship museum designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. It's a huge spiral that goes down like this. And so these activists, including Yvonne Rainier, who is leading the charge here, see if our laser beam works, no it doesn't, did a conga line dancing down the spiral and protesting this cancellation of the show, the censorship. That's the kind of work that inspired me when I first became a young artist in New York City. This group, Art Workers Coalition, that I'm talking about, was founded in 1968, and they also did things like this. Remember, right? 1960s, late 60s, we're involved, the United States is involved in a conflict in Southeast Asia. Never actually declared a war officially, but it was an all-out war in Vietnam and in other neighboring countries. Members of the group, of this artist group, created a poster criticizing the government's involvement in Vietnam, and then they went inside the Museum of Modern Art and did this intervention. If you've been to the Museum of Modern Art recently, you won't find this painting. This is Pablo Picasso's Guernica. Does anybody know why it's not there? It went back to Spain, and when Picasso gave this painting to be exhibited in New York, he said, you cannot return this to my country until Franco, who was a fascist, right, is gone, till that regime is over. And so only after that happened in the late 70s did the painting return to Spain. In the 60s, it was still there. They chose this painting, which is about the Nazis and the Spanish fascists bombing a little tiny village in Guernica, Spain, using air power, which had not really been used on citizens before. This painting was an outrage against that situation that Picasso made. So it was an appropriate way to talk about the involvement of the United States in Vietnam, which was extremely, extremely bad. The Art Workers Coalition, though, also looked at artists' rights. They were talking about, well, how come artists aren't paid something when they exhibit? If you're an artist in the room, many of you know, and if you're an artist who's going to be in the future, many of you will find out, that many times an exhibition space will say, they'll put your work on display, and then you'll say, well, do I get a payment for showing my work? And they'll say, what do you mean? You're getting to have your work on display, This is something that artists have been talking about since the 1960s, asking, well, why isn't there some kind of compensation? Why aren't there more rights for artists? Look up Art Workers Coalition. You'll find they made 13 demands to the museums and the art world including things like Social Security, including insisting there should be a Latino extension in MoMA, a whole wing dedicated to women artists. It was quite progressive, and environmental issues that they brought up at that time. 2008, I'm going to jump ahead. We all know what happened. Terrible crash, affected the entire world. It affected people in the arts and culture in a particular way because people in the arts are often very precarious. They work very difficult, maybe 2, 3 jobs. Actually, studies show they work 3 jobs just to sort of make a basic living, right? I'm sorry if you're studying art and you plan to be an artist. I don't want to, I'll get you some tissue so you can, start crying, but it's not all that bad, but we have to face it, you're not going out to find a job waiting for you if you're studying art. That's just not a reality. So there's lots of ways artists survive. But since the 2008 crash, it's become even more difficult. But it also woke a lot of people up, especially people in the art world. And various groups and collectives and artists have started to focus precisely on these issues I was showing you from the late 60s. Why aren't artists treated better by the institutions that are there to support them, including this group called BFA, MFA, PhD. Again, you can look up this group and you'll find they've done surveys about artists. How did they get trained? What are they doing? How are they making a living? And they're asking questions like this, because I don't know if you know this, but the art world right now is worth about 60 billion euros, which is a lot of money. And most artists have a very, very small share of that, if any. Another group called Working Artists for the Greater Economy have also begun to ask these questions. They've even given a kind of stamp of approval for those institutions that actually treat artists well. It's like good housekeeping seal. Looks something like this, wage certified. Interestingly enough, we're also at a moment when the outcome from this 2008 crisis is rippling through the museums in New York and elsewhere, not just in New York. But in New York, we find that several museums recently have gone on, the staff members have unionized. The new museum just recently voted to create a union. And guess who makes up most of the staff at the new museum? Artists, right? So these are people who did get their master's degree maybe, or maybe a bachelor's degree. Some maybe say, they're self-identified as artists. In any case, they're making a living working in the museum, whether it's putting up exhibitions, whether it's taking people's coats, whatever it happens to be. And they said, we need to be paid a living wage, and they created a union. The museum initially wasn't too happy with that. And so they hired this law firm out of the Midwest. When we take action, you take control. This is a law firm that specializes in busting unions, right? And they tried to stop the union, urgent services, counter-union campaign, union avoidance training, right? It didn't work. The workers voted to have the union, and they were actually just threatening to go on strike, and they've actually worked out a contract I just heard like 2 days ago for 5 years, which is really great news. So it can be done, and it's interesting to see people inside these institutions starting to think about their own situation and not just saying, well, I'm in the cultural industry and we're used to being exploited, but it's like, don't you love to be around art? Okay, that's great, but that's not enough, right? There are other issues. At the Museum of Modern Art, there are board members. There's one in particular who owns the BlackRock Corporation. He's the CEO. If you have student debt, almost certainly it's held ultimately by BlackRock. It's a global corporation that has more debt, owns more debt of your debt and other people's debt than any other corporation in the world. So artists, again, going into the museum and saying, wait a minute, we don't want this person on the board of directors, right? Another board member who came under fire recently was at the Whitney Museum. You may know the Whitney Museums on Lower Manhattan. And you see this is a sign that the Whitney paid to have in the subway, but you notice there's a sticker below it. Looks something like this: decolonize the museum. Why? Why would this take place? A man by the name of Warren Kanders was on the board, and Mr. Kanders owns a company which makes tear gas. This came to people's attention just as the so-called migrant caravan came to the border of the United States, and military was called out, the US military, and they used tear gas on women and children, and of course men as well. And guess who made at least some of that tear gas? The man who's on the board of the Whitney Museum. Here's an actual canister that was fired. I believe this is in Gaza because it's used all over the world. And if you look at the top, I just composited, that's the website of the company he owns. Okay, seriously, it's called Safariland. I don't know, whatever. And that, of course, below is a scene from the Whitney. When this exploded, it became, it was during the show, of course, of Andy Warhol, whose work you see below. But it was first the staff people at the museum who wrote a letter, 100 of them, wrote a letter to the board of directors saying, we want this person removed from the board. Now, that's a very bold thing to do because the Whitney is not unionized. And a lot of these people wouldn't even be in a union if they did unionize because a lot of them were curators and they're at a different level. So they could have been replaced. I mean, we are in New York City and there's, you know, for everybody that has a job in the arts, in the culture industry, there's 100 people waiting to get that job. So it was a very bold thing for them to do. And then outside pressure came from various groups, including Decolonize This Place, to do various demonstrations once a week for several weeks. There were letters that were posted by various people in the art industry, some of them very well known. And then there was the Whitney Biennial, which is a 2-year extravaganza of the allegedly the most important work in the United States at any given time, was taking place after the exhibition by Warhol. And some of the people in that exhibition, these are some lightning sketches I did during one of the demonstrations. Some of the people in the exhibition either did work about the Warren Kanders issue, or ultimately they pulled their own work out of the show. And at that point, finally, Mr. Kanders had the good sense to say, look, for the betterment of the museum, I'm going to step down from the board. But it was a campaign that had a lot of different components to it, a lot of different people putting pressure on the museum, and ultimately it succeeded. It doesn't mean everything's fixed, right? I mean, museums are complicated institutions, the art world's a complicated thing. We're trying to detoxify it, we're trying to decolonize it, but it's very difficult really to do that because we're talking about a capitalist institution which, you know, has roots in all kinds of sort of situations. So I'm not trying to say that this is simply the answer to problems, but it's one way people have acted. And by the way, I noticed that there was actually a $10 off coupon for Safariland to quit if you need to get some tear gas or something. I'm going to turn to the Gulf labor, and that'll be my sort of final example. This is actually a cartoon, sort of a New Yorker-style cartoon by the artist Pablo Helguera, who also works at the Museum of Modern Art. And you probably know, some of you, and maybe some of you don't, that the Guggenheim Museum in particular, starting in the mid-'80s, began to think about the idea of cloning itself and creating a kind of consortium around the world of different institutions, different Guggenheims. And it's managed to do a few of those, one in Bilbao, Spain, but they've tried a few others and they've not succeeded in Finland, in Slovenia, but they definitely had their eye and still are planning to do a museum in Abu Dhabi, which is part of the United Arab Emirates in the Gulf region. Some of the pictures you'll see I took when I was on an excursion there with this group called Gulf Labor Coalition, which I'll explain in a minute. But Abu Dhabi is a kingdom in the United Arab Emirates, and this island called Sajiat Island is basically a desert island. This is why Pablo's piece is so funny, because it's literally exactly what it was. If you're a science fiction fan, you know what terraforming is, you know, the idea that, you know, we're going to take Mars, this is Jeff Bezos's idea, I guess, and like transform it right into a beautiful paradise. Essentially, that's what is happening on Sajiat Island. They're transforming it into a kind of utopian paradise or garden. Here is where it's located. For some of you may not realize where it is. It's in the Gulf region. And why am I putting this up? I'll try to explain this. This is actually a projection by a group called the Illuminators here in New York. and they drive around with a truck that has a huge projector on it. The reason it's on a truck is because it's illegal to do this, and you have to drive away if the police come. Why is it the 1% museum? Well, the group that I'm part of, Gulf Labor, basically looked at the situation there and said, you know, workers in this region are being treated very, very badly. And I'm sure some of you actually know this really well. But I'll explain it to you in a second. Saadiyat Island, by the way, means island of happiness. This is what the plan is. This is the Guggenheim designed by Frank Gehry on the left, who also designed the one in Bilbao. A model of what it looks like. It would be enormous. It would probably be the largest thing he's ever designed. It has not yet been built, which I'll come to in a second. And this gives you a sense of the placement. What is this island going to be for? It's going to be for the 0.01% ultra-rich who will be able to buy real estate there. There'll be golf courses. There'll be swimming pools. There'll be all these beautiful museums, because Guggenheim is not the only one. You see this disc on the side. That's the Louvre from France, and that's already been built, actually. It just opened last year. And you can go to college there, New York University. They already have a campus in Abu Dhabi, and now they're going to move one to the Saadiyat Island off the coast. Right? The problem is most of the people who do the construction work in that whole region, not just Abu Dhabi, but the whole region, but Abu Dhabi, come from other countries. They come from Pakistan, they come from India, they come from Egypt, they come from the Philippines, other regions, and they can never become citizens, and there's a lot of problems with the working conditions. And it's been reported on extensively if you want to look into it. Human Rights Watch, which is an NGO in the region, has done a lot of work on this. Just to give you a sense of the working spaces that these men end up going to, and I'll explain to you what the problem is. I'm sorry, this is a little light. Okay, so if you are, let's say, recruited to go to one of these, to go to Abu Dhabi, for example, maybe to work on the Guggenheim, or maybe to work on the Louvre, or the British Museum, which is also working on something. The reason you would go there from Pakistan or from India is because you want to send money back to your family, right? Okay, that's a very good idea. But you're recruited by a person who does the recruiting, and you actually have to pay that person a fee, right? So when you arrive in Abu Dhabi, you discover that not only are you not being paid what you thought you were going to be paid, not only are the working conditions much less hospitable than you thought they were going to be, but you have to repay this visa fee, which can be up to 3 years of your salary. So you're not returning any money to your family. Furthermore, your passport is removed from you, so you can't leave, and you cannot organize. There's no unions, and you can't even talk about the idea of resistance. Although, and this is what's really important, the workers in this region do organize all the time, and they do go on strike. Right? So the group that I'm part of is mostly artists. We're not the workers. We live in different parts of the world. Some are from India, some are from the Middle East, some are from here in New York. And we're not trying to say, oh, we're doing something good for the workers. Yeah, we're trying to assist them in some way. But ultimately, we're saying the art world, and the Guggenheim is a good example of that, needs to be responsible for what it does. It can't just open up a new shop someplace and not take care of the workers that are building it, right? So we called a boycott on the museum. This has been about 8 years ago now. And a lot of people signed the boycott saying they would never show their work in the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. Not the Guggenheim elsewhere, but Abu Dhabi, including a lot of people from the Middle East who that particular museum wanted to collect, of course, because it's supposed to be a contemporary art museum. So we put that pressure on them. We started meeting with the museum people. We would sit at the table with them here in New York. We would discuss ways that they could actually make this construction happen and also be fair to the workers. And they're very good, nice liberal people, and they said, we totally agree with you, we want to do that, but it's really the people in Abu Dhabi that are causing the problem. Really? You're not giving them your brand for like millions of dollars to use? Okay. So this went on for some time, and nothing really seemed to be getting anywhere. Again, this was a trip I took to the island. This is the workers' housing they showed us, but it's kind of the perfect housing, the ideal housing. And there are subcontractors and sub-subcontractors where the housing is really, really bad. And even this was a little extreme. It's like a concentration camp, really. It's surrounded by fence, and then you're surrounded by desert. So these men are basically trapped there, right? After they wouldn't really negotiate with us, we decided to try something else. We decided to call on 52 weeks of Gulf labor. In other words, every week, someone would create an artwork or a project to talk about the issue. And we had some famous artists like Andrea Fraser and Thomas Hirschhorn create works, and then a lot of works by people who most people wouldn't know. If you go to our website, gulflabor.org, you can find all these projects that are listed there. I'll show you the one I did. I'll show you a couple other things. I'll shut up. Basically, around Christmas time, around Hanukkah, the Guggenheim puts out this little tchotchke, this little cast piece that you can put on your Hanukkah bush or your Christmas tree, and it's obviously a model of the Frank Lloyd Wright building. It's just a little thing like this, right? $20. Looks like that in the package. Along with my colleague, Matt Greco, who works at Queens College, we took that image that I made of the housing in Abu Dhabi, and we did a 3D print of it, and then we wrapped it up in a package that basically mimics the package of the Guggenheim's object for sale, with information about what's happening there, just as I've explained to you, inside the package. And then we went to the museum gift shop. And we dropped a whole bunch of these, which is the opposite of shoplifting, into the store. And there they are. And this was our contribution to this 52 weeks of consciousness raising, right? What's really curious is that several people went back a few days later, and they said, you know, the stuff's still in the store. And I said, really? Oh, we thought they would find it right away. You know, apparently either the workers in the store thought, yeah, this is pretty cool, or they didn't realize that this was an intervention. We did copy the UPC code, so it's possible they even sold some of these things. They did disappear at some point. The last two things I'll show you are more extreme interventions created by a faction of our group called Global Ultra Luxury Faction, or GULF. And GULF decided the only way to get their attention was to actually go into the museum and really sort of like make them pay attention. So again, actually, this is one of our graduate students standing, and another woman who is not disabled because she's sitting on this huge banner that at 10 a.m. on May 1st, May Day 2015, was pulled out in the lobby of the museum for everyone to read. Simultaneously, flyers fell down from the top of the museum describing what was going on, why we were there, in several different languages, talking about workers' rights. Outside the museum, people were holding a vigil. This was not the first demonstration that took place in the Guggenheim, but it was the first one where we decided to occupy the museum. Again, this is May 1st, 2015. Security almost immediately destroyed the banner, but then we sat down. 10 of us, not everyone. There were many people involved. And we held the ground. Now, this was an exhibition going on. It was actually the last day of the Arikara exhibition. So a lot of people didn't get to see the whole exhibition because the museum decided to shut the exhibition down. Not to throw anybody out, but no one else could come in during the day after we did this action. That was not our decision. That was their decision. So we sat there, and pretty soon everybody was gone, except for security and us and a few other people working on the staff. We got to see the entire show, like nobody was bothering us. If you want to see an exhibition, take over the museum. I think I just turned that off. Then NYPD showed up, and we sort of sat there thinking, you know, what's going to happen? Would they really want to see a bunch of artists dragged out of here with handcuffs on? Probably not, but 5 of us, including myself, had tickets to go to the Venice Biennale the very next day. And if we got locked up, even for a few hours for processing, we would miss our flights. We sat counting on the idea they wouldn't want to be embarrassed by the bad publicity, and the police left. We called it a success. We ended it at the end of the day, but the museum still didn't want to give us what we wanted, which was meeting with the board of directors, because we felt after meeting with the president, Richard Armstrong, we needed to meet with the board to get our demands through. We had simultaneously, Gulf Labor, been invited to the Venice Biennale to do something there. It's a longer story, and I won't get into the whole thing, but the late curator Oakwe and Wezer invited us, and some of us came for the opening and decided we could make a point at the Venice Biennale, because many of you may know that there is also a Guggenheim in Venice. We created flags and banners, and we basically worked with a group there called Sally Docks, which has started as a squatter space and is now a cultural center in Venice. And if you know some of the politics around Venice right now, they've been doing a lot of work against the giant cruise ships that have been coming in and really damaging the coral and damaging the lagoon. They helped us organize a marine landing on the Peggy Guggenheim Museum. I'm stuck on my slide. Maybe someone could advance that one. Perhaps the batteries went out. So, is there a technical person here? Oh, okay, great. So you get the idea. Here's what, more or less, we basically got into boats, and we went down the canal, let's see, and we went to the Peggy Guggenheim, which used to be her home and is now a museum. It's on the Grand Canal, and we leapt onto the landing dock, and we took it over, and we put banners up telling everybody who was at the Biennale. So people come from all over the world for this art event. It happens every 2 years in Venice. And everybody could see this from the Grand Canal as they go by in their boats, right? They have buses that are basically on the water called Vaporetti, that we want the museum to meet the workers' demands. This went on for a number of hours, and we felt pretty good. And then we noticed it looked like the police had come once again, right? And we got a little bit worried. But then if you look closely, you see one of them is saluting us. Turns out this was an art project. Yeah. Ultimately, the museum, which had an opening that evening for the American representative of the Biennale, said, we will meet your demand. We will meet you in New York at the soonest opportunity, and you can meet with the board, and we can discuss what you're talking about. And so we took a picture, of course, we succeeded, and that was it. Sadly, the museum decided, after we met with them, and after we actually showed them contracts and ways that they could work with the people in the Middle East to make things, make the working conditions much better and much fairer, they decided to call off the whole thing and have nothing more to do with us. So we did one more intervention in the street, as you can see, sort of reminding them that this was not a good move. One of the reasons they probably called it off was because oil prices plummeted around this time, around 2016, and the Abu Dhabi and other people in UAE probably started to cut back on a lot of their cultural projects. So it wasn't like we had such a great effect necessarily. Maybe we did a little nudging, but basically it was an economic reason. And the project is still out there, and every once in a while the director, Richard Armstrong, says, we're working on it. So we are ready and waiting to see what happens next. Thank you.
So just very briefly, I want to introduce Cannupa Hanska Luger. And I want to thank Julie Rothenberg for having us and collaborating on this project today. I also briefly want to share the podium with Danielle Means, who couldn't be with us today. She's the Oglala Lakota curator, originally from Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota, who currently lives in Santa Fe. So she's here in spirit, and she's the co-curator of the current exhibition, Survivance and Sovereignty on Turtle Island, Engaging with Contemporary Native American Art. So I encourage you to see the exhibition, to see Cannupa's work in the exhibition after. So Danielle had just a couple words to help introduce and welcome Cannupa. She said, and this is in her words, "We are survivors of genocide, but we are here to tell the stories of what happened and to remember what it took to survive and thrive. We are our ancestors' dreams for the future, she said. We are our ancestors' dreams for the future. And I think this idea resonates with your work, of course. So Cannupa Hanska Luger is a New Mexico-based multidisciplinary artist raised on the Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota. He is Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara, Lakota, Austrian, and of Norwegian descent as well. He uses social collaboration, and in response to timely and site-specific issues, he produces multi-pronged projects across many different media. His work provokes diverse publics to engage with indigenous peoples and oftentimes presents a call to action to protect land. Lugar is the 2019 Yerba Buena Center for the Arts honoree, a 2019 Joan Mitchell Foundation awardee, and the recipient of the Museum of Art and Design's 2018 inaugural Burke Prize. Lugar holds a BFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. He lectures and participates in residencies and large-scale projects across the globe, and his work is collected internationally. He's exhibited internationally at the Princeton University Art Museum, Ford Foundation, Washington Project for the Arts, Crystal Bridges Museum for the Arts, National Center for Civil Rights and Human Rights, and now, among many other locations, at the Kupferberg Holocaust Center here. So without further ado, thank you so much for coming all the way to be here with us today. Thank you, Cannupa.
Dosha Maragua, Dishkagna Hudosha, Nitue Hudosha, Cannupa Hanska, Mandan Hidatsa Arikara, Awache, Dripping Earth Clan. Hello, my friends. I ask rhetorical questions in Hidatsa. Who are you and why have you come? My name is Cannupa Hanska Luger. I am Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara, Lakota, Germanic, and Scandinavian. I am everything that made it into North Dakota, just about. And I'm grateful to be invited here to this place today and to see all of these lovely faces. It's actually, I didn't turn around until I got up here, and it's really nice to see you all. I wanted to start off, I don't know how I got to this place, in all honesty, but one thing I firmly believe in is that art is art is a verb and not a noun. And I think we run into these problems around decolonizing spaces and thinking about all of these notions of control and where these where art has been converted into a noun. And I think anybody who works in social practice recognizes the ephemeral aspect of art and the long kind of history of art. It's much older than even human beings or Homo sapien. Like we made our lives beautiful for a long time. And that's a progressive practice. It's a part of a continuum. But I think in a relatively short amount of time, we decided art is this verb. It's an object. And that object can then be commodified and placed on pedestals and spaces. It can be put on boxes, in boxes, and sold to people to house in their boxes. And I think, I don't think it's been that long. I don't think it's been that long in that notion, but for generations now, that's all we ever understood about art. It's all I ever thought it was. But as I work more in the world, as I pay closer attention to community and culture and the intersections of all of these things, what I start to realize is that there is something much older there, something that has an effort to communicate as the core purpose of art and art making. I started off as an object maker, and I worked in ceramic and clay and built sculptures and worked in galleries and sold this work as tiny commodifications of culture and was like, I am not going to make anything that is specific to Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara. I am going to make Indian art. And was playing around with this idea of like a market-driven economy and would put feathers and beads on figurative objects and told the people who were collecting it, this is fine. It's Native American. it's Indian, it's all you want. There's not any deeper meaning to it, and it doesn't become a source of you being like, I really care about the people. Here is my collection of objects and proof that I belong to place for a long time. Played around with these ideas, was successful at it, but it wasn't kind of like fulfilling. And so what we're exhibiting in here right now in relationship to this show is a mirror shield project. And that project was it was made out of necessity, it was made out of desperation. I don't even know how to describe it as a work of art, other than the fact that it harkens back to this idea that art is a verb and not a noun. All I did was created a video on how to produce a shield that I was hoping would protect the water protectors at the front line in Standing Rock during the Dakota Access Pipeline. And the thing that's troubling to me about this work is its legs. Here it is in this exhibition 3 years later, and every time I exhibit this work, the question that comes to my head when I'm standing in these places is, where were you 3 years ago? Where were you when we needed you? You know, did you make any of these shields? Did you send them? Did it stand on the front line? Did it protect people? And now I'm left with the responsibility of stewarding the echo of something much more beautiful than what we see and what can be shared. And that's challenging. That's challenging for me. It really messes with my notions of integrity, really, because Standing Rock is a place. It's geography, it's geology. There's a people tied to that name. Standing Rock itself is an Arikara woman who was a part of the Lakota tribe who, rather than being moved and relocated, turned herself to stone. And the people carried her everywhere because she was so special to them. That's what Standing Rock is. And it exists in Fort Yates, the little town that I was born in. That juts out into Lake Oahe on the Missouri River. That's what Standing Rock is. And so during the Dakota Access Pipeline, it became a hashtag, it became a part of an algorithm and a feed, and people got to express their activism through liking and sharing. And this is when I first got involved with social media as a potential medium, because I didn't really pay too much attention. I'm 40 years old, I was born in 1979. I learned how to communicate differently than most of the people in this room. And I didn't really have access to, I didn't have interest in social media as a platform until it came to describing something that I had close contact to. And in that, what I realized was that our phones in our pockets are a weapon. And the weapon is sharing. This ability to document and to preserve and to share ideas and experiences through platforms such as social media, for all of its double-edged shortcomings and whatnot. Something incredible was happening where it amplified certain voices and people got to move messages around in a way. But what I saw that was lacking was, I saw a lot of allies and no accomplices. I saw a lot of people liking and sharing and it moving in that fashion. So the ocean was wide, but it was not very deep, you know? And what I found was if you can provide a prompt for people to participate, you move them from an ally to an accomplice. If you create a small, simple act that allows people to participate on a deeper level, to create intention, to create empathy, and to create some sort of purpose and resolve in these issues, they will. And that's what changed the whole way I was making work. Just moving through these are all images from Fort Berthold. This is where the oil was drawn from for the Dakota Access Pipeline. This is where I'm enrolled. I'm from Fort Berthold, and all of the oil that was running across Standing Rock, where my father's from and where I was born and my brothers live, was being drawn from the reservation that I'm enrolled on. So I watched this industry transform one of my communities for the worse, and then threaten the other one. And so I had to act. My little brother works for the EPA at Standing Rock, and he gave me a lot of the insider, instant what was going on. And as an artist, I have privilege, so if I don't waste that on myself, how do I use it? How do I utilize it? I have access to institutions, I have access to media groups, so I was like, okay, let me just push these ideas forward. And I started I started a supply line basically out of New Mexico to Standing Rock because the people who would collect my work, my peers and stuff in New Mexico were like, we know you're Lakota, we know you're from Standing Rock, how can we help? So I just started doing a supply run back and forth, but this whole mirror shield project came out of an October evening when everyone was getting sprayed with water cannons, and it's cold in North Dakota, and I know that, and I had just left and came back home, just left North Dakota and came back to New Mexico where I live, and then was watching this unfold on Facebook and Facebook Live, and it's like I need to make something. So I produced this video and tried to answer a question: what can one person do? I'm one person, I can try to figure that out. I went to a Home Depot, I went to like a big box store where everybody has access to. I used their panel saw. I brought $60 with me, and that was the limit of my that I could possibly spend on this. I don't know what happened over here, but I may have turned it off. Anyway, somebody else can just click through those too, because I'm just like periodically. The thing that I found that was interesting was I needed to create a prompt for people to participate, and in the act of participation, they got involved. I had no intention of what it was going to look like. I had no expectation of what it could be. I made it out of desperation and quickly. If you watch the video, it's like embarrassing for me to watch it myself because I'm antsy. The filmmaker who filmed it was like, do you have a script? Do you have any blocking? And I was like, I've got a drill gun and I've got plywood, And so we just opened up the camera and I started to make these mirror shields as a prompt for people. They ended up coming in like thousands. I had no idea the response was going to be like that. And they came in many different forms because it was open. It was an open format. I talked about it earlier today, but one of my favorite iterations of this was an 8th grade class that had written on the inside of the shield in marker and crayon, thank you for holding those shields. I'm sorry we can't be there, but thank you for protecting the water for us. In like magic marker and crayon written on the inside to whoever it was who was going to hold them. And it's not a part of what my plan was. It was just something that happened out of response from that. But this made me start to think that there is something more in the creation of art that goes beyond the object and the celebration of the object. What it reminded me of was that there's a different idea of what ownership is in art. Right now, I work in an industry that caters to the ultra-rich. The more successful I become, the smaller my market is. There is no sustainable equation for me as an artist that has a long-term effect. And definitely, some people make it, don't get it wrong. There's probably somebody in this room that will kill it on that model. But by and large, most of us, we will never be paid the amount of time and love and effort that we put into it. This is, there's zero return on the amount of ourselves that we put into any level of artwork. And so I think we need to start to question what is a return. If it cannot be financial, economic, if it cannot be monetary, what can we hope for as a equitable exchange? And by doing projects like this mirrored shield, this is it's an ugly art object, and it is a terrible shield. And I slide through this because people use them on the front line. And there are photographs of people who I don't even know, who I didn't get to meet, who applied these on the front line because it was better than a puffy coat, because that's what we had mostly to protect ourselves against rubber bullets and tear gas canisters and everything else. So it counted for something, but it is a terrible shield for what we were facing. The application of it, too, in space was also interesting because I saw shelters that were built out of these, so roofs with slatted mirrored shields to reflect heat back down into the space. I saw kids sledding on them down hills, and I'm like, all of that is exactly how this thing is supposed to work. Don't let me get in the way as an artist, as a creator. Don't let me get in the way of how it's applied, how it's used, and why it's valued. Like, please, let necessity drive that. That idea of creating this work started to move me towards an idea of, I'm just sliding through this stuff. There is, these are future ancestral technology classes. These are actually figures that are based on the monster slayers from the Mandan Hidatsa culture, but specifically Mandan culture. And I've been doing these kind of like on-site performances. These are residue. These are documentation of the performance. But I basically go to land sites that have been a part of this extractive industry, various ones, whether it's mining or oil or timber, and I go apologize for the human-shaped things, and developed a whole kind of like side. I do a lot of different projects, and as I'm committing to this slideshow, I'm seeing my the organization get confused, because what I really wanted to talk about is maybe it's not on here. No. This idea of creating prompts for work changed the way I started to engage with work, and it created a more interesting project, which I've been calling Counting Coup, and looking at data and trying to rehumanize data and do projects where people could participate in the creation of very simple forms to make sense out of large number sets. And in doing that, what I found is there is something that happens to the viewer and the object that changes, because people participate in these projects, and when they enter the space to see these objects in institutional settings, I always see somebody who's participated in the project, and they have ownership of that work without possessing it. And that challenges just the whole makeup and the design of the whole thing. I don't know if it's a way to make a living or anything like that, but it's definitely satiating something that was missing in my practice. Yeah, just kind of wanted to talk more about that sort of notion. But I would also I prefer talking with people than at people. And so with that being said, I live in public. My name is Cannupa Hanska Luger. Like, I have all the URLs for that. Nobody has Cannupa Hanska as a .com or anything. So it was open. Please check it out. I have projects that I do that are participatory and need help doing them. So I'm just putting that out there as a way to move into this next section of our engagement, so that we have the opportunity to talk with you rather than at you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Greg and Geneva. And I'm thinking maybe it would be great if you both could sit up here, and maybe you could be flanked by me and Kat. Back there. And oh wow, look at all those people standing room only. Oh my goodness, there are some places to sit up here. A few of you guys can come up here.
Do you want us to grab a couple of chairs for you two?
Maybe I'll borrow this one. That works. Can I still use your phone? I'm not taking an extra.
I've seen Jerry moves to this better.
So we've had a lot of ideas presented to us. Some of them are probably new to some of us and maybe a little familiar to others. And I think Kat and I probably both have questions that we would like to ask, or we're happy to get the ball rolling or engage. But more importantly, we're interested in any questions that you all might have for either both of them. You can have a question that you say, either of you can answer, or maybe specifically for one or the other. So maybe we should start it that way with questions from the audience. Is that okay? Yes, sir.
The first speaker thoroughly mesmerized me. And when he was discussing the demonstration at the Guggenheim, for one split second, I thought that was the Guggenheim in Abu Dhabi. And I said, that's impossible. You would be beheaded in a dictatorial regime like that if you had that type of a demonstration. And of course, I was wrong. It was in New York. But the thought that came to me, one of the signs said $120,000 art degree. That's a bargain. Today you wouldn't be able to get for $120,000 an education. And the most serious threat to any type of education, particularly to artists, is the current government of the United States, Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education. The first thing she did when she got into office was to replace, you have all of these for-profit institutions that will have people borrow tens of thousands of dollars. They then drop out after 2 weeks, but they still owe the money to the federal government.
Sir, just briefly, so is there a question? There's a question at the end for one of the speakers.
My question is this. Isn't it important in your presentation to point out what is preventing the study of art and other studies in the United States, the policies of the United States government that are so anti-learning?
Do you want to respond, Gregory? Or?
Just very quickly, just to clarify, that the workers in Abu Dhabi do go on strike, and they do organize. Sometimes they're actually expelled from the country because of that. Sometimes it's the only way they can go home because they don't have their passports. But, you know, we should not underestimate what those people are willing to do. They're in a much more difficult situation than us artists, you know, doing what we're doing. So that's important. And in terms of financing art, I teach at Queens College, and I forgot to mention Social Practice Queens, which is this.
Sorry, I was supposed to.
Yeah, it's okay. Program very quickly, and I'll happy to talk to you afterwards if you're interested, so we can talk more, where we try to bring artists together with issues of social justice and environmental justice, and we have both an MFA, and we also have a certificate program now that tries to do that at Queens College, and I know some of you are maybe even thinking about transferring there possibly. In terms of the cost, my God, it's a big issue. I could talk forever about it. I don't think it's just a political issue. I think it's an economic issue. I think that, you know, basically student debt in this country may be the next trigger for the next recession because it's enormous, and it's not just, you know, it's not just coming from the political realm. It's also coming from people like Larry Fink of BlackRock and these big corporations who hold this debt. And well, anyway, that's a big issue. I actually have a question for Cannupa. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I was really interested in when you started talking about big data. Mm-hmm. I have my students now, a couple of them are here, terrified because they're reading Immanuel Kant's you know, section on the sublime, and he talks about like big things that you cannot even. And I'm just kind of curious what you're doing with the data thing. It was really interesting to hear.
An image of beef curtain up.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've been doing projects with really actually hard, like not hard data as in like this is hard data, but data that represents really difficult things. I've been looking mostly at bodies, bodies in relation to different objects, and trying to contextualize what that looks like at scale. The numbers aren't huge until you start trying to comprehend what they represent. And oftentimes the brutality that created these body counts was dehumanization. And so how is dehumanization the answer to create safeguards to protect them? And that's the thing with data, is data is great for policy. It allows people to comprehend and punch in numbers, which gives them an opportunity to create safeguards and policy to protect people. But it dehumanizes them in the same process, which is exactly how we got to this point in the first place. Yeah, on the lower corner there's an image of a stack of beads with a person standing in front of it. This was a project I did that was around missing and murdered Indigenous women, queer and trans communities, out of data coming out of Canada. Specifically just Canada, because in Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation Act gave grassroots organizations teeth to actually gather this information from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and anybody else kind of gathering bodies and data around people being murdered and disappeared. So the number that I was working with was 4,000. It's like it's an accessible number. It's not a huge number. But to think about that in relationship to a femicide on an indigenous population that already has a low population, you're removing the ability for us to create more of us. And so I don't know what the collateral effect of that's going to be over time. But 4,000 is too many. You know, it's too many, and it's much higher than any other demographic as far as just murder. And it has a lot to do with dehumanization. It also has a lot to do with extractive industries. And so this is why I started cycling into these extractive industry projects, because as I was working on this project, I started it by wanting to make a bead for every one of these bodies. This piece is actually called Every One. And in the process of starting this, I had just built a deck on my property in New Mexico, and it was all made out of Canadian timber. And I'm looking at the data, because the data was gathered, and I'm layering it with all of these other maps, and I'm seeing that extractive industry has a direct correlation to the missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada, and I had just built a deck out of Canadian timber. And I was like, it's my fault, you know? I'm invested in the destruction of these people. I'm invested and I'm accountable. And I was okay with it until I realized it. And meanwhile, I'm making these beads and stacking them, you know, in a thoughtful and prayerful way. This is already too many. This is enough. This has to stop. Here's one out of 4,000. And I said this over and over and over again. And like 3 days in, I had felt every emotion it was possible for me to feel. And what I realized was that was the most beautiful that this art would ever be. That object is a byproduct of something really beautiful. And the beautiful part was the process. And I thought back to the Mirror Shield project and thought, I need to share this. This is the art. You know, the art is the process of making it. And so I did that, and I have started a whole offset of projects in my practice that are called Counting Coup, and we look at data sets. The current one that we're working on is called Something to Hold On To, and I'm looking at bodies found seeking asylum in the U.S., but also globally. And specifically, I live in New Mexico, so I'm looking at the U.S.-Mexico border. We mentioned candors and tear gas. All of those same tactics that they used there, they tested on us at Standing Rock just a year prior. And all of those people traveling, those are my cousins. Those are Native people. And one thing that I keep thinking about as we talk about decolonizing this space and stuff like that is that everything we understand as far as money and wealth and power in this country is dependent on us not being here. Because if there is an indigenous body to this landscape, then it challenges all of that wealth and all of that control. And when I look at candors and tear gas and all of that, I also would be remiss not to mention sugar. You know, that's killed more of my people than tear gas ever has, and has struck me and hurt me harder than any tear gas canister ever did. But I think we do need to be accountable and really think about where we collect our funding, how we support all of these things, because for me as a Native artist, there is no money I won't take because it's been taken already. You know, like there's no ugly, dirty dollar in this country that didn't cost blood for my people, you know, period. And there are some that are worse than others, you know, for sure. So I think it's important that we look at ethics in philanthropy. But I've also seen pie charts of how much and where money goes in this country as far as philanthropy, and less than 5% of it comes to arts and humanities, you know. So there's a lot more other avenues out there. Yeah, anyway, side pony.
So we So many questions. But I would like to invite students to respond or ask some questions. Is there anybody? Yes, sir?
I would like to ask you, sir, when you did the Mirror Project, when you first started, and is it growing to this day with many people actually partaking in the Mirror Project?
No, it was just specifically to protect those people standing right there at that time. This project is moot at this point. The river and the water that we were trying to protect, as soon as number 45 came in, signed a letter, and they passed right underneath the river without any care. But, our president before didn't do anything until he was just about out. So there has never been a political entity in this country that has had us in mind.
I wouldn't count on a repeat performance of the president doing something just as he's out, but.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that was for Standing Rock specifically, and it was to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. But there's a pipeline running through Minneapolis or Minnesota right now through very precious and dangerous waterways that needs protection, that people are putting their bodies in front of to prevent. There's one running through Canada, and it's going to run through Washington State. But all of the indigenous tribes through there, they're building tiny houses so that they can say that they're inhabiting the land in which their ancestors are from, putting themselves on that front line. And you had mentioned it too, artists are not activists, you know what I'm saying? Activists put their bodies on the line. I know activists, and we do the best we can with what assets we have, and the reality is, I got daisies for hands, you know what I'm saying? I grew up on a ranch in North Dakota, but still, I spent too much time in the studio. I'm much better at inciting 10,000 than being one on the front line, and that's the importance of arts and artists. We can use our privilege and access to amplify issues. We can move these things forward. But that's just the beginning of it. The reality is we need you much more to respond and to do something. And also, these institutions need us more than we need them to inspire and to create those sorts of things. So the whole pyramid demographic that we are comfortable with has been inverted at some point, and I don't know why or how. And it's been like that for generations, and I'm terrified of the path-dependent nature that we're in. We need to snap out of that,
Sure, yeah. Because I really don't depend on the government for any kind of situations. I depend on myself, and everyone else should do the same thing, because we can't expect some government or some president or anything to help us with when it comes to finance. The people suffer a lot because they're just going to say, okay, but then the reality check is down. I expect that they're not going to do it because they can't go out their interests.
Yeah.
And if the flood of people then want to help out.
And as I've been doing more of this social work, the thing that I've realized is I can't change anything but that which I can touch. That's this space just right around me is really where I can make a difference. But if I can inspire somebody to do the same, if I can touch somebody who can touch somebody who can touch somebody, then we start to see these micro changes, they're subtle little tiny things, but they start making a difference, and I think, from what I've experienced, I can't be certain because I'm still alive and it all is just human-shaped dots from where I'm standing, but hopefully down the line.
I'm actually going to push back a little on this. And I agree, actually, you have to do the things that are immediate and you have to do those incremental things. But I don't think you should give up on the big governmental structures. I actually think we need to start thinking about how do we get those structures back on our side. Because we've given that territory over to the worst, not just to the Republicans, but the Democrats too. We need to really think about what does it mean to have a state that actually would look after us, right? Because so much of what we've done is just I can only be an activist in this little range. Do that, but don't forget to push for the bigger changes, because a lot of what we're dealing with is out of our control precisely because we've given up that space. So I would say don't give up on that.
I'm wondering, I'd like to ask just a quick question. I like that you both have raised, maybe indirectly, but some of the contradictions around art, social practice art. Well, we haven't really defined that yet, but rather art as social intervention and activism, and the relationship of the arts economy and the art world to actually, capitalism as we know it since really, since the 19th century. So, Clement Greenberg said that artists are tied to the bourgeoisie by an umbilical cord of gold or something like that. And you mentioned, well, all money is dirty because, so it really doesn't matter who you get it from as long as you're using it for some kind of social good. I'm wondering, how do you feel about it? How do you see those contradictions, even with regards to trying to reform institutions or stay on top of institutions like MoMA and the Guggenheim, that their history really is tied to the rise of a particular class interest in the United States.
Just to clarify your question.
Sorry, that was one of those questions that what's the question? But
the contradictions.
Contradictions.
Okay.
Yes, contradictions.
I mean, what can I say? It's absolutely true. Someone asked me a few months ago when I was in Amsterdam giving a similar talk, and someone raised their hand, and they were from Cape Town, South Africa, and they said, "We're trying to create a museum that is decolonial. You think that's possible?" And I said, "I don't think it's possible. I don't think you can decolonize really in the end, because these structures, and they do come out of the 19th century, these museums, are so integrated with all of the problems and these contradictions that we're talking about. In fact, if you took away all the colonial assets from the Metropolitan Museum of Art or from the Louvre, they would disappear. The museum would not be there. There would be nothing left, right? So we do have to really think about those contradictions in our own practice as artists and being involved in the cultural sphere. We also have to be kind of honest and conscious about, if we want a decolonial artistic world, it's going to require absolutely fundamental changes. And you can't just do that in the cultural sector.
Right.
It's going to have to happen, as we were saying, beyond just artists. Artists cannot be the only ones to sort of work on that. They might be able to push a little, but it's going to require a bigger change. So the question you raise is so big that we could talk about that all day, but that would be my immediate thought is let's look at the institutions and let's be realistic. What can we do? In Europe, a lot of the museums, particularly in Belgium now, are giving back works to Benin and other people in Nigeria and other parts of Africa that they stole. And it's starting to be a wave across the entire world. I wouldn't think the Elgin marbles are going to return anytime soon, but who knows, that might happen. But it is actually happening across the world. It just isn't going to sort of reduce things to a non-contradictory situation, in my opinion. Maybe that's not the goal we can be realistic about.
Yeah, I mean, I think people and culture is a non-colonial museum. That there's a maintenance involved in indigeneity, that there's a maintenance involved in culture, right? But every institution is about preservation. It's not about maintenance. It's about locking it in at a certain amount in time and holding it to that to educate the next generation of people. But I mean, I think about this in terms of repatriation of indigenous objects and returning them to communities. We have to build a museum with climate-controlled stuff in order to receive these works back from other major institutions, which makes us colonial in an effort to repatriate these objects. But they wouldn't have them if we weren't able to take care of them for thousands of years through a practice called maintenance, not preservation. Maintenance allows it to change. It allows it to evolve. It allows it to be taken care of and to be fed and to serve its purpose, as a part of the culture. And once it loses that, it's put back. It's let to disintegrate. It's let to get stop being, which is something that we have a hard time understanding. As Western and cultures of dominance have moved around the world, we have a hard time with loss and death. We're scared of it. It's inevitable, everyone in this room is doomed. Like, I promise you, the only way out and the cost of living is death. We aren't going to make it. Spoiler. But the cool thing is that we can push ideas forward and culture survives us. Culture is a part of Continuum. Culture allows us to have a museum that is not colonial. And we did that around the planet for most of human experience. What we've experienced is a fine layer of powdered sugar on the surface of a really nourishing donut, you know? And that's like the human experience. It's thin. It'll blow away if we give it time. So don't lose hope. Like, and I don't even want to say hope, like participate in making that change, you know, actively. Get involved somehow, some way. And little ways is just as good as big ways. Yeah, read the room.
Do you mind if I real quickly? So thinking about, I think you were talking about the situation in Europe, and I think you're about to create an interesting situation in Europe with this settlement project, which just definitely speaks to a lot of this, what we've been discussing around colonization, decolonization, indigenizing.
Yeah.
Do you mind talking briefly about the settlement project?
Yeah, I'll talk briefly about it. I haven't figured out how to fund it totally yet, but
You can talk about that too.
yeah, we've got
Around the
a,
hat.
huh?
Pass around the hat.
Actually, we can just pass this around. I'll take whatever. I've only raised about $700 so far on this project, but I'm doing a project in 2020 that's tied to the, there's this big thing called the Mayflower 400 or the Plymouth 400, and it's 4 nations working together to commemorate the Mayflower. So from 1620 to 2020, it's been 400 years since the Mayflower came to this country. And I was asked by a group in the UK to do a project. And I was like, no, I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole, you know? It sounded too complicated. And I'm not Wampanoag. Like, I am Mandan, Hidatsa. The Pilgrims never made it to my peeps, you know? It was a completely different group of people heading west. But it opened up this possibility to actually do like a reverse colonial idea. And it's something, I don't know, it makes me really uncomfortable, it makes me really nervous, so I'm gonna do it because that's also exciting. And I'm bringing 27 Native artists from different communities in the US to do a project. I'm about to have a conversation with the Wampanoag Advisory Committee, actually, when I go down to Boston later on my trip out right now, to create a prologue and an introduction to this project. But I'm bringing I'm bringing a bunch of Native artists to Plymouth, UK, and we're going to build a settlement right in the middle of Central Park in Plymouth and share contemporary Indigenous experience through performance art, through music, through composition, through all of these kind of like contemporary and new media aspects of Indigenous people, because my experience in going to Europe is people look at me and they say, you're not Native American, because they want me to be in buckskins and feathers. You know, they want to see the romantic idea of what Native people are. And a big problem with that is that a lot of times when Native people go visit Europe, in order to be seen, they'll reinforce those ideas, you know? And we do that in politics all the time. We will dress the part to be seen by you, which is strange, because when we see ourselves, we're in basketball shorts and cowboy boots, you know what I'm saying? We're just like everybody else. And our invisibility has a lot to do with not seeing us like that. Because I promise you, there are natives in this room right now, and I promise when you go to the store, there are natives next to you, you know. We are part of the public sphere, and just because you can't see us doesn't mean we're invisible. And so this project is trying to like amplify our presence and actually bring really contemporary art to this provincial town of Plymouth, UK.
They wouldn't like you to say that, but yeah.
Oh, they're the ones who told me that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right, actually.
Yeah. Plymouth is like the largest village in the UK. That's what they told me. And I agree. It's very blue collar. It's very down to earth, but they don't have. They're opening up like a big modern art museum in relationship to this commemoration. So
That's
it's super
fascinating.
complicated.
That's really
I'm
interesting.
trying to bring as many different tribal people. This is why I ended up bringing 27, because I was like, I can't do it alone. I'm not, the advocate for all Native people. We are so complex and so diverse and so contradictory. Like, I'm sure there's a Native person in here that the words coming out of my mouth, like, offended today, That complexity is not shared, or not celebrated, not amplified. And I think it's important to have those conversations in public settings, just to create a three-dimensional, fourth-dimensional idea of what Native people are. I'm Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara, I'm Lakota. I am not Native American, I don't know how to engage.
It's interesting that in Brazil, indigenous people use that in protests. I mean, they dress up in these kind of like almost corny, feathers and things like that to sort of create this I don't know, spectacle of political presence.
Yeah, and that has a lot to do with external expectation. It has also a lot to do with that they haven't been colonized for as long as the rest of us. So their access to these materials, I still have access to our customary regalias. We use them in ceremony. We use them when it's important. You know what I'm saying? And so oftentimes, even representing themselves in Europe in that fashion is to set a precedent and to amplify certain ideas and presence, So, like I said, man, there is so much hypocrisy, so much contradiction within the art world, but in Indian country, in all places. Like, we are looking for a world of like oneness, but I'm terrified of. I don't think unity has to come at the cost of homogeny. I think that the diversity is our greatest strength, our relationship to place, the protocols that are embedded in the landscapes that we're from have a lot more to do with what makes us special, and special and or designed for the land relating to these places. I don't know. I'm possibly.
Other questions from audience yes.
Where are the mirrors now?
I have no idea. Yeah, like I said, the mirror shield was created specifically for a moment. They've served their purpose. I have like 10 of them. I made one of them. I produced probably 200-300 of them when they were needed. But I have no idea where they are. And it doesn't matter to me, They did their thing, and now they rest, They're probably in a landfill somewhere, in all honesty. They were probably scraped up by my brother working for the EPA when they were cleaning out and clearing out Achetishikowi, after the fact. So I have no idea. I mean, it's interesting because Standing Rock, we talk about these things and we see those sorts of things, but Standing Rock is a place. And it had two major economic drivers. It had the casino and it has agriculture. And the casino is working at 20%. Ever since we stood up to protect the water, the people in North Dakota and South Dakota quit coming to the reservation to gamble in protest. So our second largest economic driver is undermined by us standing up to protect water. To this day, we don't talk about that. You know what I'm saying? That's not a part of the algorithm or Standing Rock is a hashtag, That water system is what we use to feed the agriculture, which is our primary source of economic drive, is ag. And now it has a time bomb underneath it, So we don't talk about that. Hopefully we'll never have to use those shields again, but they were made out of necessity. They were made for a moment.
Yes, sir.
Is there ever a point where you feel as an artist that your abilities just isn't enough to combat atrocities around the world?
Nope. Superhero, I can do it all.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
No, of course. I mean, I can't. But the question is, does that make me stop? Absolutely not. You know, I'm never going to live in that beautiful world that I can imagine, but I die trying. Yeah, because I'm a part of a continuum. Because I got kids.
What is that beautiful world that you imagine?
I'm working on it. I've been doing these weird, like, sci-fi, indigenous science fictions. So I'm trying to describe it as we speak. If you get a chance to check it out, you know. There's some up at the Ford Foundation right now. An exhibition called Utopian Imaginations.
Where is Ford Foundation where?
It's their gallery space in the ground floor.
Yes, sir.
Do you think any true progress can actually be made without there being involvement of violence? All through history, because all through history...
You're challenging these folks with
it always comes to you
questions.
could protest as much as you can, but usually it always ends up that one side was against another, and then there comes a coalition or agreement that, you showed us that you have power and that this is really what you want, I'll give it to you, without there actually being any fisticuffs per se.
Yeah. I think just like everything else, there's new material sciences, there's new access for communication, the world is changing in ways that hopefully we can prevent that, but life's abrasive.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, we grind up on each other all the time, and you know, sometimes it's just living, sometimes it's violence, you know? I could imagine it, but I haven't seen it applied yet. I know that there are softer ways, and I know that the machine that is trying to wipe us out and control us is very good at violence. So I don't know if violence is the way to respond, you know? I think there might be ways to, like, I don't even know what it is, but I know it's going to cost. Somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody gets hurt in the process. But do we allow that to be? Do we take that on that hurt? You know, I don't know. I
think you have to break violence down into like what you mean precisely. You know, look at Gandhi's campaign of Satyagraha, where people passively resisted. Then it was taken out by Martin Luther King and some of the civil rights people. You know, but sometimes there has to be something a little stronger off to the edge that allows that kind of passive resistance to operate. And I think in each case you have to really examine, what do I mean by violence in this case? Because, you know, the very fact that some people, like, let's say the ones in Abu Dhabi that we were talking about, have to go there to do this horrible work in incredibly hot temperature, and of course we know the temperature's even getting worse, to try to send money back to their family. That's a kind of violence too. That's a violence embedded in economic relations, right? And that's right in this room right now, right? You had another question.
Oh yeah, another question. On average, how much Native American blood would you have to register for a reservation or to get benefits?
There are 572 different tribes. They all have their own sovereignty.
Yeah.
So there's different protocols around that. Blood quantuming in general is not ours. That's an external idea. Blood quantuming is a way to allow us to police ourselves into eradicating ourselves from the land. Because prior to contact, it was rare for a man to spend his whole life within the tribal community, and this is where I come from. Oftentimes they would leave and be absorbed into another community, another culture, just for genetic diversity. For that sake alone, we had a matriarchal system. So our clan system, I'm Awache, dripping earth. That was, it follows like mitochondrial DNA. It follows the female lineage and the female line. And if you were absorbed into a community, whether by force, violence, slavery, or just pure interest, because you looking right, you know, you had to follow protocol. And protocol within, you had to participate in the culture in order to become a part of the culture. I would really be interested to seeing how that could actually create something regenerative and actually like allow this country of settlers to be embedded and have a deeper relationship to place. We ain't there yet. I'm going to put that out there right now, you know. But these are protocols, you know, and it's about like participation. Yeah, so it varies. Some people it's through lineage. You have to have like, I don't know, sometimes it's an eighth, sometimes it's a quarter. There's all sorts of, and it's all arbitrary, you know. It's like based on, I don't know, how you breed dogs and horses and stuff like that, you know. So it's peculiar.
Was there a question back there? Yes.
I have a question. So I'm here with my creative writing students, and thank you so much. Today in class we were talking about language, and particularly the use of language, and you also talked about connection. And so I wondered, one thing we talked about in class today was the difference between calling yourself a water protector and a protester. Could you talk a little bit about connecting to others and getting people to connect to the projects through language itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's embedded. Like, there's so many strange semantic, you know, things. Especially when we start talking about law and things like that. You got to be very specific about what words you're using. In relationship to Standing Rock, yeah, we called ourselves water protectors because that's what we were there doing. The media called it a protest. They set it up like we were protesting oil. But the reality is we were just trying to protect water. In fact, Standing Rock put out an opportunity for the oil company to build a bridge across where they wanted to run it underneath the lake, and then run that pipeline over the bridge so that it can be inspected, taken care of, watched, and it would never blow and flood, you know? Cost too much. The company that was putting that together was not interested in paying that amount. So we were never protesting oil. We know how embedded we are. We know how dependent we are. We don't think it's great, but what we knew was more important was the protection of the water. And that's what we tried to say. It was media that always called it protest, you know? It was never us on the ground calling it protest. It was about protection. It was about something much deeper and longer term than that. The oil is finite. The water is, you know, something we actually are dependent on. It's not perceived.
But as far as connecting to others and getting people, you know, connected to these projects, you know, what is a way to build a bridge as far as making connection?
Yeah.
Students here, like what advice would you give us?
Well, I think it's interesting. There's a lot of students here that I saw that are going to actually sit in positions at institutions, you know, that are going to school right now to be the next wave of curators and sit on these boards and make these decisions. One thing that I think is really interesting is like intersections, you know, where do our experiences cross over? We all have unique experiences, you know, but there are points at which these things are woven together. But at most institutions, they're really, because of how it's set up, because it's about preservation, even in the creation of like work for Latin American, Native American, African American, these exhibitions are all broken down for those demographics, you know? But I'm really interested in how do we create communication across those things. Like there's a lot of intersections between us all, but the way we are presented to one another is separate and isolated and labeled, you know? So I think I charge that next generation with the responsibility of breaking down those systems from within. And to go back to this gentleman's question, what you were saying, I don't think there's any one way to do this thing right. I think all the ways are the right way to do it. And I say this because I come from a Native community, and we're always struggling with like a unified front. You know what I'm saying? We're always like, can we all just come together and create policy and move together as a whole force? But the reality is our lack of organization is the reason we're here today. Our lack of being unified is the reason why we can't be wiped out. The mechanism of oneness, you know, is and homogeny and control wants us to be one thing, because then it can focus all of its efforts to wipe us out. But when you come at it from every different angle and can't communicate to one another to make those things happen, that's a very difficult thing to combat. And so I think every way, peaceful, violent, you know what I'm saying, subversive, from within the system, from outside of the system. These are all the ways that we basically break down the machine. The machine doesn't know how to deal with that level of complexity. So how do we like recognize that complexity and rather than tearing each other apart laterally, utilize it to challenge the thing that's oppressing us all, you know? We were talking about debt earlier. I was talking with my friend, the guy who actually filmed the drone footage in the exhibition that I have in there. His name is Rory Wakemup. And he and I were talking, and he mentioned a thing that I think is absolutely, absolutely true. Debt is the new reservation, and you're all Indians now. Like, every one of you. What happens when you get off? You know what I'm saying? What happens when you get outside of that system? And I'll tell you from my experience, they don't like it. They prefer you on the res. You know, they prefer you where they can count you. And that's what debt and debt control and debt consolidation, all of that is to create, is to force you to be in your place. I lucked out. I didn't go to school. I did my undergrad and started working. I don't have debt from getting my master's, and I managed to squirrel away enough money to buy property and paid for my truck. You know, I don't have debt, and that allows me to say crazy ass shit like this right here. You know, because that's the fact of the matter. I'm not beholden to anybody. You know. But I'm dependent on all of us, like, absolutely.
I was just going to add to your question, or your observation, that here we are, two visual artists. The generation that I grew up with studying painting, mostly abstract painting and abstract sculpture, speaking about our work, writing about our work, was just not considered important. We didn't learn those kind of skills. Only a few of us kind of like aspired to that. The program that I teach in at Queens College, we actually have for the master's degree a required writing class. The students have to take the course. They have to learn how to, you know, write about their work, speak about their work. So things have really changed in that sense, and I think this is a testament to that fact. Even though you don't officially have an MFA, you've grown up in an art world really that has changed in many regards to this kind of articulation. Just in terms of debt, I always say that I thank my lack of debt, because I also don't have debt, on a little tiny spherical metal object that circled the Earth when I was 2 years old. Anybody know what that was? Sputnik. I know you know. No? Sputnik. Oh. Little friend.
Right.
The Russians launched a fairly heavy, actually, object circling the Earth, the first man-made object that circled the Earth. And the United States was like, just went ballistic. It wasn't so much, we were working on our own satellites, but what we didn't realize is they had such huge rockets to launch these things into space. And this created the so-called missile gap, right? Their rockets are bigger than ours. It also, the very next day, led to incredible funding for education, for the arts. You can literally go back at the newspapers and look at that changeover where the Congress said, we need money for science, we need money for everything. What happens at the end of the Cold War is, well, we don't really, why are we paying for people's education?
Right.
Why are we paying artists again? What is this about? So the generation that starts after the Cold War, one of the most important things they learn in school is how to be in debt the rest of their lives. That is the education, first level of education, staying on the reservation, right? You're going to borrow money for your future. The state's no longer going to give you money because we invest in the future. It's a fundamental shift that you're all living with the consequences of.
And it becomes normalized.
Totally normalized.
I actually, I don't know if it's a good question or an observation, but it's so interesting that there's this unionization activity amongst arts workers at a time when, you know, union participation and union support is kind of at this all-time low, that these cultural workers are recognizing themselves as workers and the importance of unity. I mean, diversity is good too. I'm not saying anything bad about it, but just this kind of consciousness that you know, that it's sort of a movement away from this kind of romantic notion of the artist as a genius who is just kind of, you know, above and outside. So it's connected with the notion of social practice art, I think, in an interesting way. And I'm wondering to what degree these artist workers are kind of aware of that or thinking about that, or is it just a practical matter, you know?
I'll say two quick things. One is Art Workers Coalition, which I first spoke about in the 60s.
Yeah, yes.
They envisioned themselves as workers within a system. I think that was kind of a new idea.
Yeah.
We're art workers. We're actually part of the production of art. And that's how they addressed the museums and said, therefore, you are, in a sense, our employer, and you need to kind of support us and do things for us, right? Because that was not the case. I think what's happened since then is artists have gone from kind of symbolically presenting themselves as workers, which is what they were doing really, to actually being mostly a worker within a cultural system. And it's a longer explanation than that. The second thing I'll say is that a lot of the people, the young people who are unionizing now in these institutions, got their BFAs, got their MFAs, studied with people like me and people like my professors, and they were taught precisely the things I'm talking about now. Yeah, art is a beautiful, romantic thing, but as you say, Julia, it also is a business of sorts, or it's also an entrepreneurial zone, or it's also something where you have to give your labor over to it, and you shouldn't just like forget that aspect of it. Something called institutional critique, which is a sort of, it's kind of a concept within the art world, grew out of that. And my guess is that a lot of the people who are going on strike now are the children, in a sense, of institutional critique,
right.
Bringing it home to roost right within the institution in a way that the people who initially created institutional critique had no idea was ever going to happen. It's not an art project. It's actually the labor itself that's rebelling.
Right, that's what's interesting, I think. But, yes.
I have 3 questions, real quick.
Can you turn them into one question?
Yeah, okay. How has the bison population been stabilized in the recent years? Because I know in North Dakota that it was on a rise for a little bit, but for the past 2 years it has been gone down about a few numbers. I want to know, are the population increasing, or is it still
It's bison in North America are not free roaming creatures like they were by their involvement on the landscape. They are farmed, you know, and they have been bred with an Asiatic bison, so they are not the North American bison. There are very few North American bison that are located way up in the Northwest Territories in Alaska and Canada, and they live in the forests now, and they call them forest bison. The population is stabilized because the population is economy. So, yeah.
Oh, the next question. Okay.
You know, there may be ones from other students.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
the only reason I'm going to stop you there. I don't know if we wanted to, and I
Oh.
just wanted, we need to check on time, I think.
Yeah, I don't actually, I'm
Yeah.
not in timeless.
Okay, I think we're close to time, so. Yeah, I think we have time for one more question from one student who hasn't asked yet. Can you say it a little louder?
My
Well,
favorite
I think
project?
she's asking each of you your favorite project you've worked on. It's a big one.
Yeah.
Give a shot.
I work on a bunch of different things. I'm really excited about these future narratives that I'm playing with. As far as like a singular project, I like the idea of creating indigenous futurists as an opportunity to engage with other futurists and imagine a place that gives us a beacon through this dark times that we live in right now. You know, meeting a lot of young folks as I travel around and stuff. There's a hopelessness that scares the crap out of me. You know, of like, what's the point? Look at what we've inherited. So I like playing around with these future ancestral technology projects to kind of create a beacon in the future and figure out how it would work with other futurists like Afrofuturists or Latinx futurists, and try to create and envision a future where we exist and it's not Star Trek and like a homogenized, you know, narrative in the future. That's kind of what I'm most excited about right now.
I like his project. I didn't actually show you my own artwork, so except for the one little project we did so I won't talk about that. But I really do like his projects a lot, and there's a lot of interesting correspondences which we can talk about. But one of them was a group in Barcelona called L'agencias, and L'agencias did projects where they took children protesting like this and they pasted it on the shields so that when protesters went into the streets to push back against police, they were basically taking their batons and beating the images of children. It was a brilliant kind of project. So this idea of creating shields for public spaces is really, I think, terrific. It's interesting, we were both talking about petroleum, too. I don't know if you caught that, right? On a certain level, we're talking about the petro-economy, right? I mean, this is this kind of common thread, this dark thread.
Well, there were a lot of common threads, and I mean, it's just, in a way, happy. I mean, we did curate the talks, but also a great, not accident, but I think a great combo, put it that way. You were a good, good together. Good together.
Will you?
I'll put my hat on.
I'm going to officiate. Well, I would like to thank you all again for coming. Obviously, these events are, they're for you, and makes us all very happy that you're here, and we hope you come back. Our next event, what is the date of our next event? Oh, I should have this on. The 20th of October. Oh, yeah, that's right.
The official opening of the Turtle Island exhibition, and I encourage you to wander through it now, or come on Sunday the 20th, and we also have our next event, which is on Wednesday, October 23rd, during club hours, for those of you who can't come here on Sunday.
That's another opening, but when is our next? Okay, wow, we have to do a better job of coordinating.
Well, we have, there's pamphlets when you came in where you signed in, and Laura's holding one right now, that have all of the programs for the season for the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, so you can come back for events and receptions and all kinds of activities, and I think we'll get the date on that next one before we close.
Okay, so the next event in the KHC lecture series is Ideologies of Racism, Past and Present. That's Wednesday, November 20th from 12 to 2, and it should be very interesting, featuring our own Dr. Trevor Milton, Assistant Professor of Sociology and Criminology here at QCC, and another Queens College professor, Dr. Judy Yu, who specializes in education, but that should be also an excellent panel, and I hope to see some of you back here at all of these events.
Thank you.